Right. First of all, welcome to everyone. It's beautiful to see so many faces that I recognize and also not recognize. Thank you for giving us your time and energy this evening. We're all really excited about this. So I guess just to give you some context into EYESORE, we're a collective of designers, writers, photographers, illustrators that came together around 5 years ago. First of all, to produce a magazine, and that magazine, the focus of it really being documenting and communicating how we as people, both at an individual level, but also as a community level, at a national level, experience different built environments around the world. That was 5 years ago, and we produced that first magazine. Since then, I guess we've evolved into using different media forms to really try and articulate those same experiences. So moving away from just the magazine into workshops, into a public program, into films. But the core purpose always being that idea of archiving, about documenting and about communicating how we navigate and understand the built environment. And by the built environment, we really mean a term that's not just the city. We really mean it as the relationship between built forms and humans and other living organisms that inhabit those built forms. So really looking at it as a relational landscape between everything. Now, in terms of markets, I guess our relationship with markets, both as a space, but also as an issue, started a few years ago when we featured a story in our last issue, number 4, about Latin Village in Seven Sisters. For those that don't know, Latin Village is an indoor market in North London that is primarily occupied by traders who are either first generation or second generation South American, Latin American. And really that's a market that's been fighting for their survival for the last 10, 15 years in the face of corporate gentrification, regeneration, and all the tensions and pressures that come with those processes. So we covered them in a story, and it's a relationship that we've continued to build on and maintain over the last few years. Now, they're not featured in this. We featured them before in a few other panel discussions and works, but I guess from then on we built up also a relationship with Ridley Road, which is a market a bit further down the A10 Kingsland Road in Dalston, which similarly to Latin Village is also experiencing a struggle against power in that neighborhood. And I think it was about 6 months ago when I sort of got into, I got my hands on a copy of a magazine, a new magazine from Tunis, Journal de la Medina, which actually the author of that initial article about Latin Village had brought together and created. And now in that magazine, there was an article about El-Kherba in Tunis, which is another market. And it was really striking for me to read that article, mainly because of how similar the tensions and pressures were in that market and those that were being experienced at Ridley Road and also in Seven Sisters at the Latin Village. And for me, I really started to think about that. Despite the fact that these markets are operating in very localized, context-specific areas, all with their very, very context-specific pressures, we actually can draw some parallels between all these tensions and all these dynamics of violence. And really, this is what this event is all about. So really trying to create space and give time and attention to understanding the localized issues and city-wide issues that Ridley Road and El-Kherba are facing, but also try and open up a discussion which links the two together so we can understand the sort of, I guess, the ongoing issues that markets are facing as a global issue, as representative of much broader changes in how our cities are being restructured and operated on. So if there was one message that I'd hope this event can put across, is exactly that these are local issues, but they're also very, very global at the same time. So Yeah, thank you very much for joining initially. It's really, really good to be here with you all today. How it's going to work is that we're going to first hear from Katharina Grueneisl about El-Kherba, and then Bill Parry-Davies is going to talk about Ridley Road, each for about 10 minutes or so. And we're then going to use the final half an hour, or perhaps longer if there's an appetite for a discussion. So please prep your questions. I will. I know enough people here to actually start picking people out if the questions are dry as well. So for those who know me, I am looking at you with sharp eagle eyes. So that's the plan for the day. And so yeah, without further ado, let's go over to Katharina.
Yes. So hello everybody. I hope you can hear me properly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'm really glad to be joining you. Thanks a lot, Armin, for inviting me and for EYESORE to put together this event. And I'm really glad to be able to join you from Tunis for this conversation tonight. And I really think it's one of the few good things about all these online formats that I can join this conversation in London or in front of a, I would say, probably predominantly UK audience tonight. And bring this kind of conversation extended, right, to a place like Tunis tonight. So as Armin already mentioned, maybe just one word of introduction. So I am myself actually a PhD student. I'm currently kind of finishing my thesis. I'm actually at Durham University, based in Durham, so in the UK, but working and writing from Tunis. And I'm actually writing on the second-hand clothes economy, but in that framework, I'm also interested in other types of marketplaces in Tunisia, and especially in the capital city. And the market I will be speaking about in the next kind of 10 minutes is actually very interesting, because I think the very first question it kind of pushes us on is, well, what is a market? Because in many ways, the kind of Ridley Road market or the Latin village that Armin just talked about is kind of very obviously qualifies as a sort of street market or a sort of covered marketplace, whereas El-Kherba actually in Arabic translates as the ruined space or the space in ruins. And Nina, if you don't mind, like forwarding a bit. So yeah, so this is just where we are. We're in Tunisia, here bordering Libya and Algeria in North Africa, and we are in the capital city, so in Tunis, in the north of the country. If you give us the next map, yes, then here we have the city center of Tunis, so the capital city, by far the kind of economic and demographic center of present-day Tunisia. And you see here El-Kherba, so the marketplace I'm talking about, is located right in the center of the city. If you give us the next map, we'll zoom in even closer. So here we are, and we see El-Kherba is actually located within what is called the Medina of Tunis. The Medina is the historical old city of Tunis. It used to be walled, it is no longer. And El-Kherba is a particularly interesting space. You can kind of see that there's a kind of an open space that is indicated next to the writing El-Kherba. And this open space is kind of the ruined place, which is where the denomination comes from, because Allied bombardments in the 40s and then post-war kind of demolitions of these half-ruined buildings led to El-Kherba being a kind of open space in the very, very dense urban fabric of what you see here as the historic old city of Tunis. So El-Kherba, first of all, was just an open space and was called the ruined space. Then if you give us the next picture, I'm just going to show some pictures because I think it helps kind of illustrate what I'm trying to talk about. So what happened soon was that El-Kherba, this kind of open space in the dense urban fabric, turned into an informal kind of traffic hub, especially for those yellow microbuses that you see here. And these microbuses, especially from the late 1980s onwards, were transporting people, but also goods from the Libyan border to the capital city. So what happened in 1987, the Libyan-Tunisian border opened, and then during the 1990s, a very kind of flourishing cross-border trade developed. So El-Kherba became kind of a hub of circulations of people, but then also goods and money. So it became kind of called the informal central bank of Tunis, kind of laughingly, because this is where a lot of the informal exchanges as well of money happen. So you had this as kind of a very central space of circulation. If you don't mind forwarding to the next slide. So what happened then from the mid-1990s onwards was that Kherba turned more and more into kind of a marketplace where traders were not only unloading and reloading those different buses, but actually began trading. And they began trading mainly in made in China commodities, what is called Shinwa in Tunisian Arabic, and it became called a souk Libya, which is kind of a Libyan souk, because this is where all the kind of Libyan goods were traded. And as Arman says, I mean, this shows very beautifully how we are absolutely at the core of a globalized economy here. So we have actually a Libya souk that trades in made in China goods that are imported through Libya because they are tariff-free. So we have kind of a global space of circulations here at the edge of the Tunis Medina from the 1990s onwards. You can just show the next image because it shows what the Kherba kind of looked like in early 2017 when I started my field work. So kind of a very dense marketplace that would be usually referred to as an informal marketplace because it was never kind of authorized as such, but it actually had a very complex and quite stable order, meaning you had people with market stalls and then a set of kind of more mobile traders, as you see here on the left, sometimes using those kind of hand carts or kind of different types of stall spaces that can be set up in the morning and dismantled at night. And then there are storage spaces inside the historical old city. So what happened kind of to fast forward was that in the years that followed the Tunisian revolution in 2011, that most of you will kind of have heard about and remember the pictures that were shared all over the world, what happened was that there was kind of a weakening of police presence in public space. So there was a rapid kind of increase in different forms of street trading, and El-Kherba grew and grew. And this led to a certain type of kind of mobilization, actually here not in favor or defense of the market, but against the market. So you had citizens movement, like very prominently, one was called in Tunisian, Wenu el Trottoir, which is like a French to like Arabic mix to say, where is the sidewalk? So they were mobilizing to say, we need to save the Tunis city center, we need to regain our sidewalks, and also formal traders complaining about the kind of boom of informal trade in the city center. So if you show us the next slide, we see what happened kind of in July 2017, a massive police campaign, what they called a clean up campaign, that very violently and literally overnight dismantled all the stalls, destroyed the merchandise. And it was kind of intentionally timed to coincide with Eid. That's kind of one of the most important Muslim festivities. So all the traders had left to visit their families. So it was kind of a strategic moment to dismantle this market overnight. And if you show us the next slide, we see they started kind of really a clean up, or what they called a clean up, just kind of emptying the space. And if the next slide shows us that actually then El-Kherba was turned into a parking place. So once the police was kind of then permanently occupying the space, the market traders had been some arrested, others displaced, the market stalls dismantled. And so El-Kherba stayed kind of empty and traders displaced for several months. And then the governorate kind of handed over the issue of the displaced traders to the municipality and let them deal with it. And the municipality kind of had to come up with a system of reordering the market. And kind of asking the question, well, how can this space be reorganized? And if you, Nina, if you show us the next slide, you see then what happens. So you see these triangles that are kind of painted on the tarmac. The kind of municipality painted numbered triangles on the tarmac, and these were to guide the kind of relocation of traders. Of course, what had to happen was that trust was already broken because traders had been violently displaced, others arrested, A lot of them had been without work for several months. So conflicts erupted about this relocation scheme. And a lot of the traders that had been kind of promised to be relocated in situ were never relocated on site. And if we see the next image, the issue was also that the municipality obliged traders to invest in those type of shop spaces. So the idea was order in the market looks like size, like plots of equal size, and shop spaces that all have to kind of follow a standardized design. And but a lot of the traders actually didn't have the money, right, to invest into these type of shop spaces, because they were only given the plots, but then were left alone to invest in these shop spaces. So when if you forward one more time, we see here, this is kind of towards the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. The Kherba was once again, let's say, occupied in part, but actually the patterns of occupation had changed a lot. So a lot of the traders that were displaced were never able to come back, whereas others with better kind of links and you know, to either the police or the municipality were able to kind of fend for a space in this new market. So actually, it seemed like the market was once again working, but actually the type of occupations had radically changed. And also new fault lines and lines of conflict had appeared, because a lot of the kind of local inhabitants felt unjustly kind of neglected in this relocation scheme and said, we are also unemployed, we want a space in this market. So overnight vandalism happened, and a lot of kind of violent conflicts erupted that actually kept the Kherba from going back to its earlier kind of forms of organization. If we see the next slide, it shows us a bit like what the Kherba looks like today. So you have kind of, once again, right, some traders set up these standardized shop spaces, but also this rapidly digressed from this type of standardized model. So I come to an end. If you go to the next slide, maybe just to show that also those who were displaced kind of returned to various forms of mobile trading or street trading. The next slide shows us the type of more mobile hand carts that are being used to sell all sorts of goods, because traders kind of re-entered today like a cat and mouse game with the police. That obviously works to earn the police a type of regular income in the form of bribes, but at the same time makes the life of traders very, very difficult. And in conclusion, I'd like to just speak very quickly about what Armen mentioned. So what is this kind of Journal de la Médina? The next slide shows the cover of our last kind of journal. So it's a kind of participatory journal that was founded more than 4 years ago. And really with the idea of kind of opening up a different view of what the old city of Tunis is, a place that is still seen often in very derogatory terms, that's often seen as kind of a marginal and dangerous space in Tunis. So it's really kind of the idea of opening different types of viewpoints on this space, and also on what is urban politics. That was kind of the objective of this last edition. And here also, I guess, my article kind of drawing attention to marketplaces in present-day Tunis as spaces that are really places where kind of a form of everyday politics becomes extremely obvious, and where different people encounter the state as kind of an actor of violence, but also different levels of the state that work according to very different mechanisms. So often the municipality working against the governorate, and not necessarily working with the police. So kind of a place, the marketplaces as spaces of contestation that kind of ask broader questions around what is present day urban politics, and how do these kind of power relations play out in urban space. And a very last slide, just for my kind of the final reflection, because I think it's something that's also interesting in regards of the questions we be discussing in Ridley Road. These are the illustrations that the very talented Tunisian illustrator Leah Jaziri drew for my article, and it was kind of her interpretation of the questions I raised around order. So what are the kind of imaginaries of order that guide kind of public governance interventions, like the intervention in El-Kherba, And what are the types of kind of order within, for example, a marketplace that remain invisible to the government? So how is it that a space like El-Kherba, that functioned as really an economic hub for Tunis for several decades, is seen as a chaotic space or a marginal space that can just be dissolved overnight, right? And can be reordered top down without actually considering the market traders as interlocutors, and without kind of taking seriously the patterns of order that they had developed over decades. Thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Katharina. Yeah, as I said to you last night, I was so excited to hear more about the market, and obviously the article was my sort of entry point, but that's just illuminated so much more about the situation. So thank you for sharing all that and joining us this evening. Bill, how are you doing, sir? You ready?
Yeah. Well, my name is Bill Parry-Davies. I'm a solicitor. I've lived in Dalston for 35 years. I've shopped in the market for over that time. Now, just to place where Ridley Road Market is, it's 3.5 miles north of the Bank of England and the City of London, and we can actually see the spires of the Cathedral of Mammon from Ridley Road. And it's situated on Ermine Street, which was a Roman road from the Bishopsgate of the old city, the Roman city of London, to York. Also, it's also called the Old North Road, and more recently the Kingsland Road, and now it's called the A10. Slightly less romantic. And in the 19th century, the area was all market nurseries, and one can imagine the growers would sell their produce on the side of the road. And then in 1865, the railway came to Dalston, and the whole area was covered in Victorian houses. The nurseries, the market nurseries, were largely gone, and it became a middle-class suburb. And then I'm told that the market moved to Ridley Road in 1880, but what the traders' grandparents told them is they had to move off Kingsland Road because of the combustion engine to get them out of the ways of cars and lorries, and that's why they were moved into Ridley Road. And that's what the traders have told me. They've been pushed around ever since. In the 1970s, they used to store all their stock and their barrows on the old coal yard that was there by Dalston Junction, where the railways met. They were kicked out of there when the new shopping centre was built. So the shopping centre, as you can imagine, is selling, 20, 30 shops selling brand products. So they were kicked out of there. They were then moved into Birkbeck Road for their storage. That caught fire. It was happened to coincide with the plan to redevelop the building, so they were kicked out of there. And then they were given replacement storage, and that also burnt down in the 1990s. And then finally, they have some storage left in the Ridley Road shopping village. And of course, they've been told to get out of there as well. So Dalston is, the profile of Dalston is, in terms of business, it's got about 3,500 people employed in Dalston outside the market, about 800 businesses in Dalston. And 2/3 of that space is retail. It's the retail hub of the area, which is a border between the metropolitan boroughs of Islington and Hackney. And it's a very vibrant area. We have independent cinema, we have an independent theatre, we have at least 5 live music venues that I know of. So it's a vibrant area, and it's Ridley Road Market that really adds the main vibe. We call it the beating heart of Dalston. It's regulated by well, let's talk about the people. The people. Throughout the period, we know that traders could pass down their stalls from father or daughter to son to daughter. And this was permitted under the regulations that the local authorities brought in. Now, this is a photograph of Lee Mayo, and Lee Mayo is one of the oldest families in Dalston. If you carry on showing these slides, that is Lee Mayo's dad, called George Mayo. And George was actually born on the stall. When he was alive, he told me this. I've met him quite a few times, and he told me this. He was born on the stall. And the next slide shows Lee's grandfather. And Lee's grandfather, that's Lee's grandfather and his horse. And he was the last market trader to bring produce to Ridley Road Market by horse and cart. And his stable was just up the road, actually, from where I live. I used to take my daughter up to see his horses when she was a little girl, and she's now 32. So Hackney's always welcomed refugees and immigrants. Ridley Road used to be a Jewish market. And in fact, Jack Cohen, who founded Tesco, started as a market trader in Hackney. You may know of him. His motto was "Pile 'em high and sell 'em cheap." And he also had a motto, "You can't do business sitting on your ass." So he's quite a character. And obviously that business now is worth billions globally. Another famous person who started in Ridley Road Market was Alan Sugar. He used to sell car aerials from the back of a van in Ridley Road in 1968. He was also of Jewish heritage, like Jack Cohen. But now the market is very different. Whilst at one time it was a largely Jewish market, since then, with every people from all over the world that come to take refuge or come to live in Hackney, we now have traders from all over the world. We have people from the Caribbean, we have people from the continent of Africa, people from the Kurdistan, people from Afghanistan, people from Lebanon, as well as the old English traders. If you carry on with the photograph, you'll see this is Larry Julian. Now, Larry Julian is one of the original families, white English families trading in the market. He's a fourth generation trader. He's recently retired. And you show the next photograph. This is Larry's parents. His mother is pregnant with Larry at the time, and sitting on the car is his older brother, who has also just now retired, and his dad, who was a trader. And the next photo shows Larry's granddad in the market on the right there. So the market has changed from one of families handing down stalls through the generations, and now the new entrepreneurs. And so you get people coming from all over North London, really, to buy specialist products, because we have products in the market that come from everywhere, from Africa, from all over the world. And you'll have seen, if you've watched the film we've made, you'll see some of those traders talking about where their goods come from. And they come to Ridley Market because they're specialist goods that you can't buy in Waitrose, in Tesco, in the supermarkets. You can only buy them in places like this. And obviously local people come there because it's a source of affordable food. And the other reason they come is because they come to socialize, they come to meet their friends. And Ridley Road has become part of the identity of many people. You see a person, you say, "What's your name, where are you from?" Where you're from is very much part of our identity, and people identify with Ridley Road. It's the home of the bargain. Now, in terms of the other people in the market, you've got the council. The council have been regulating this market, and I was interested in what Katharina said about marking pitches on the ground. In Ridley Road, they are marked on the ground. You're only allowed to trade from a certain pitch size, for example. You can be disciplined if you spill over onto the adjoining bit of ground. And how it's enforced? It's enforced, I've known 2 ex-policemen were the enforcers in the market. The current market enforcer is an ex-policeman who was actually dismissed from the police for harassment and bullying. So these are the kind of people that Hackney employ to keep order, if you like, in the market. In terms of the changes that have happened in the market, as I've said, they're regulated by the local authority, to my knowledge, since about 1990. And there are what we call permanent traders. Permanent traders are traders who are recognised by the council as permanent, and the chief distinction is they have the right of appeal. If they're misused or abused by the council, they can appeal to a court, a magistrate's court. Whereas the people who they call casual traders, who are given a licence day to day, have no such right of appeal. So if Hackney want to control the market, or the local authority, obviously it's in their interest to have people who can't appeal to the court. And so the battle is always to get a formal street trading licence if you want to have a little bit of security. But the problem is, the recent problems with Hackney is that in about the 1980s, Dalston, which used to be a middle-class suburb for the civil service in Victorian times, gradually became an industrial area. And at lunchtimes and after work, the market was full of people coming out of factories and their workplaces to buy. Those people are no more. Those factories and warehouses were then when the businesses closed down in the 1980s, those buildings were occupied by artists and musicians, creatives. And at one point we had more creative people than any per square meter than anywhere else in Europe. But sadly, the last 10 years have, I mean, in my job, I'm a solicitor, artists have come to me, and of course, when they went into these temporary accommodation, they never got security of tenure. And so regrettably, a lot of them have had to leave and go east. They've gone east to, first they went east to Hackney Wick, then they went to Walthamstow, then they went to Berlin. So the area has changed, the demography and the economy, the local economy has changed significantly over the last 15 years. And one of the reasons for that is that in 2000,
Bill, you're on mute. I think you went on mute for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah, you're back.
How about that? So when you have major infrastructure changes, money follows it. And what we've seen is developers moving into the area, demolishing the historic areas of Dalston, building 20-story blocks of flats, mainly for people who are private buyers, better off people, very little provision for people who might need to shop in the market. And unfortunately, a lot of the change in demography is people who don't shop in the market. So it's been a battle for the traders. And over that time, in the last 20 years, we've had a lot of battles. I've been acting for the Federation Market Association for about 20, 30 years now. And we've had many battles when they've tried to discipline people, where they failed to provide adequate lighting to the stalls, they failed to provide adequate storage. And some of these battles, we've ended up in the Court of Appeal over them. So things got progressively worse because earlier this year, in April, Hackney introduced new regulations for the traders, and they were 240 pages. And perhaps one of the most sinister things about them is that they introduced a regulation that even the permanent traders could be removed where their stall was in the way of redevelopment. And hand in hand with that, the local authority, Hackney Council, have passed a new local plan for the development of the area. And I think you'll see that on picture 8 and 9. Sorry, I'll come back to this lovely man, he's one of our traders.
Just a heads up, just a couple minutes left on these ones.
So here we have the council's plan for the market, and you'll see at the bottom there, Ridley Road market must be retained, and this means the stall holders, but there are infill development opportunities. So when you try and develop any of these buildings, you're going to cause tremendous disruption in the market, and they've declared the north side of the market a development site. We've now had offshore companies, tax avoiding companies moving in, buying up these buildings with the council's cooperation to get traders out of the way, to get these buildings vacant, like the covered market of the Ridley Road shopping village. So if you carry on with the pictures, you'll see that is a close-up of Ridley Market. The whole of the north side of the market is now marked for redevelopment. And if you move to the next picture, you'll see here this man in the hat. He's the faceless one. These are the faceless developers, the offshore companies, and nobody knows who owns the companies. And then the next picture, you will see the motive for this. This is the motive to acquire wealth in the name of regeneration and progress. And finally, the last picture, you'll see some of the campaigners that have been fighting to preserve the market, working with the traders. And I think my time is up. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, for that. As always, but I guess for me at least, disheartening to see just how much violence there has been from those in power, but also inspiring to see the work that yourself and others have put in to keep the market alive and going. So thank you again for sharing that all with us. So I think we're going to enter the discussion now, and I guess to kick things off, I'd just like to invite Kieran Kirkwood to take hold of the space. We're actually going to have Kieran speak, but we didn't quite manage to work that one out, so we're going to get that for another opportunity. But Kieran, if you'd like to just unmute yourself, maybe just very quickly share, tell her who you are, and then sort of get the dialogue going. And I'd be really interested to hear your reflections and thoughts on what you've just seen.
I can be really quick, and I don't retain as much factual information as Bill does, so I'm very glad that he was able to give us all a lot of history on the market. I've grown up in the area my entire life. And as Bill was saying, that this market is, I would say it's probably one of the most famous uncovered markets in London. And particularly in Hackney, it's like a point where people come together, and Dalston has seen as London has seen, like a massive, very aggressive amount of gentrification and what people call social cleansing, which I think would be a more accurate way of describing it. And I guess the only thing I would add, because Bill has given a lot of the detailed information that's important to know about the market, is that it looks like our markets, like our uncovered markets that where affordable food and clothes and other things are like a important front line in the battle against social cleansing and gentrification. We often think about gentrification when it comes to housing, which is a huge thing. But in general, I would say it's more about space in general, which includes where we live, but it also includes things that reproduce the things we need in our local communities to survive. And it's mainly just a process whereby the communities that are not as profit making are deemed less worthy. So therefore, our spaces are not really being looked after either by the local council or developers who are trying to make profit from them. I guess also just to draw some parallels with the Save Latin Village campaign, which I've been part of 4 years or so up in Tottenham. The developer who have been trying to mess with that market for the last probably about 16 years, that's been a struggle, but particularly recently, described it in their in court as they described what they wanted to do to Latin Village, which was to create a market that would not be accessible to the local community. They described it as a gateway to South Tottenham. And my question would be, a gateway for who? Because if people already live there and they use that market, then they don't need a gate to get there. And they're sort of describing it as if this is, for developers, I think they're looking at these opportunities as a way of creating more corridors, essentially, for profit in local areas. I hope that makes sense to people. It's kind of like developers speak. I think they do talk like that. They talk about connecting up these areas. And if you demolish a market that's affordable for the local area and turn it into something that's more for people who live in the UK will know what I mean when I say this, with a Waitrose or a shop where we are more likely to get middle class people to shop there, it's going to mean that prices in the area are going to change. I guess, the parallels are quite clear with places like Latin Village, Elephant and Castle, the market at Elephant Castle in London, which is in South London, and Ridley Road. They're essentially really important gathering places and affordable places for local Black, brown, working class migrant communities. And it just seems as if developers are really moving on markets at the moment. And it seems to be the last battleground, or one of the last battlegrounds in the fight against social cleansing and displacement, essentially, because it's not only our people being displaced, but our spaces are being displaced. Does that make sense? That's the only thing I was going to add. I think I have to stop now. I just wanted to add a little bit of like context, maybe. I hope that was helpful. Oh, and I guess I would ask like Katharina, like what parallels you see between like both of these markets. Yeah.
Thank you, Kieran. Much appreciated. Katharina, have you got any response to that? You're more than welcome to take your time and respond, because we do have a question in the chat as well. But if you'd like to respond to that as well, and now, please.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to respond. Well, thanks a lot, Bill and Kieran. I mean, it's really, really interesting. I mean, I know these markets also myself, so it's nice kind of to kind of know the spaces you're talking about. And I do think that there are really interesting parallels, but also kind of important differences that also kind of pose really interesting questions for Tunis. So I think the whole kind of debate around what is a good market and what is a bad market, I think that's kind of right. Definitely like a central question, because, and I think actually it relates to one of the questions that was asked in the chat as well, which was, you know, to what extent are these kind of, is the Kherba, the place I talked about, a space for tourism or for niche tourism? And so I can kind of, my answer to that is, there are good markets, which are the markets that are wanted, which are markets that attract tourists. So the kind of, you know, curated Oriental bazaar environment, right? That a typical tourist to Tunis wants to see. So you have in the Medina, literally like a 10-minute walk from the Kherba, which, as Kieran and Bill were saying, is an extremely important economic space and really like an access point for people who need affordable goods in the central city. Only like a 5-minute walk away, you have kind of tourist markets that are really kind of curated as the bazaar experience. And these markets are wanted. As this is kind of what the municipality sees as kind of a good use of space of the historic old city. And actually tourism was really used as a central argument in this cleanup campaign. So the governor was saying, you know, we have to reclaim the city center and make it kind of, you know, an enjoyable experience again for tourists, because what happened after the revolution is that it became chaotic and a scary place and a dangerous space, right? That was kind of associated with government failure, so the type of chaos you saw. So I think this question around kind of what is a good market and what is a bad market, I think is a really central question that is of course linked to who are the populations that are using this market, but also what are the goods that are circulating through a market. Because what is really interesting is that a lot of what is circulated in the tourist bazaar is also from China. And a lot of the affordable goods in the Kherba are also from China. So actually, you know, it's not like the one is kind of an artisan market for local artisans promoting local business and the other is a China market. Actually, both are China markets, but one is kind of curated as a tourist experience and the other is kind of a space for really like for affordable consumer items. And one more thing, maybe because it's something that came up in both what both Kieran and Bill said, is also, I guess, the question around like to what extent are marketplaces points of access to the city for migrants. And I think in the case of the Kherba, this is really central because it's a space where a lot of rural migrants arrive. So this is kind of the first place where rural migrants often arrive. And these are also networks of kind of recruitment, networks of organizing accommodation in the city. And I think historically, a lot of marketplaces in London played exactly the same role and are still playing these roles, right? So it's also looking at commercial spaces as spaces that are very, very central for different migrant communities to organize, whether these are foreign migrants or here, in this case, kind of rural urban migrants.
Thank you, Katharina. Alina, are you all right? Do you want to ask your question yourself, or you're bringing it up comment yourself, or should I do it? I'll take that as a no. Okay. Fine. So can we go to David? You've got a question, I see.
Hey there. Yeah, I was just thinking what you were saying about these curated tourist markets, and you see what you could see as a sort of similar thing in London to where around the corner from Elephant and Castle shopping centre, you have this market called Mercado Metropolitano opened, which is kind of food trucks and kind of fine dining and framed to look like a market. And you see a lot of that coming to replace, typical markets. So I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Well, the classic one.
Should I answer to the question or?
Bill, do you want to answer to that?
Me?
Sure, if you feel like you can.
Well, I mean, what I can, am I on, can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you. Yeah.
I mean, the absolute classic curated tourist market in London is Covent Garden, because Covent Garden used to be the fruit and veg market of London. And you're probably all too young to know this, but the whole of Covent Garden was going to be flattened. And they managed to preserve it. The minister went around putting a pin in various buildings saying this building's listed. So they stopped the demolition of Covent Garden, but it was gentrified and they have created this classic tourist market right there. But the other thing I just wanted to say in parallel with Tunis is that where Katharina was telling us about how the municipality wanted to standardize everything, the numbers on the street, the style of stalls, and this is absolutely typical. This is what's happening in Ridley Road. The new regulations, they say we can require you to operate a particular style, particular colors of the stalls, particular coverings you can have on the stalls, and we can require you to move if you don't fit the brand. These are in the new regulations. So there are, and it's all to do with cleanup of the market. They think the market is dirty. They think the market is dangerous. They tried to close the shopping village. Hackney cooperated in closing the shopping village because they said it was a dirty and dangerous place with antisocial behavior. So I think there are strong parallels in the way that authority tries to standardize and sanitize the spaces that people occupy.
Katharina, have you got any thoughts on that based on your knowledge of the Tunis context?
Yes, I mean, I'd like to respond actually directly to what Bill said, because I think he's totally right. I think it's probably the most interesting way of kind of making a direct parallel between Ridley Road, Tunis, but also like many of the other markets. It's kind of, it really raises kind of a question around, well, state authority and regulation, and kind of to what extent can actually regulation really disrupt the kind of operationability of these spaces, right? Because I think in Tunis, one of the arguments that's being made, or one of the kind of dominant framings, would be to call the El-Kherba an informal market. So I guess for like the typical lens would be, well, what is the problem of this market? The problem of this market, it is informal. So meaning it's lacking formalization. So it's lacking regulation. So when I saw the film of Bill, I mean, what was really interesting in there is that the kind of regulation is something that is actually really like inhibiting the operation of the market, and is something that is perceived as kind of a threat and a menace, is very similar to the way in which the state was perceived in El-Kherba. So it was really kind of the idea that the type of order that was being imposed was actually creating chaos. And that's kind of how the traders put it. They were like, the order of the state creates chaos. So I think it's kind of a direct opposition of what is order, and right, how can we perceive order, and how does that kind of challenge our ideas also of what is formal or informal around kind of economies and markets. And I think it's a really, really central question.
Yes, yeah.
We have a question from Sid and Anya in the chat, which is, how will markets evolve in the future with the competition that arises from e-commerce and the high street? Bill, have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, what we do know is that there has been a decline in retail in Dalston and nationally because of people ordering stuff online. But I don't think that really affects a market like Ridley Road. Ridley Road is essentially a fruit and veg market, which you can't I mean, I suppose you can have Ocado bringing your stuff, but you know, it's a fruit and veg market. It's stuff you can't actually buy. You can't order persimmon or yams or these exotic products that come from all over the world that you can find in Ridley Road Market. So I'm not sure that e-commerce is going to have a big knock on the market. It's really, the main problem is the change in demography. And the question is, will traders have to change what they sell to meet, you know, the new hipsters of Dalston? Because if they do, those products will not be available for the 50% of the people in Hackney who are living on the breadline. And that's why the market is so important to us.
I'm gonna there's lots of questions coming in, thankfully, so I'm not gonna let both of you respond to each one, but Katharina, maybe you have some answers to this one. So Mark, do you want to show us your lovely face and let us hear your lovely voice? And
there we go. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone, for your amazing presentations. It's really great. I'm an avid market user myself. I'm from Tooting, and if you know Tooting in South London, Tooting market is going under some changes, good, bad, who knows, still out there to be figured out. But what I wanted to work out is, are there any good examples of markets which have pivoted well through regeneration? If so, what are they, and what are the ingredients which make them successful? I think just to add a bit of context to this question, with Tooting market in particular and Brixton market, a lot of my friends live around the area. We've seen it change, and as it changes, a lot of my friends decide not to go to the market. So they actually forcefully freeze themselves out of something which is changing. Is that an issue? Are they making an issue, or should they be involved in it and start using it still? It does cause a lot of friction, and I'm a type of person which is like, do you know what, it's changing, let's just go for it. Let's eat our sourdough pizzas and go for it, because we're from the ends and we want to be in the end. So it makes sense to me. So I want to get an idea of what you guys think about any examples of good markets which have managed to successfully survive through a wider regeneration.
Katharina or Bill, have you got do either of you have an example you can bring up and discuss?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not from the Tunisian context, but so I think one of probably worldwide the most kind of famous, and maybe, you know, yeah, let's say in a way, you know, I'm always skeptical about selling something as a success, but like definitely a very interesting project of market regeneration was in Durban in South Africa. The market is called Warwick Junction. So it's actually like a massive traffic junction that was kind of a fresh food market, but also kind of very famous kind of, you know, open street cooking. And Warwick Junction, there's a beautiful book published about Warwick Junction and this market redevelopment. It was a regeneration that went on for almost a decade. And so that tells you a little bit about how complex that process was. And again, right, I mean, that regeneration came out of a kind of mobilization that maybe, you know, is similar to what's happening at the moment in Ridley Road. So I guess it's always right, the basis for it has to be kind of a very broad kind of mobilization, and that creates a lot of knowledge about the market as a basis on which to work for the regeneration. And I think, just to come back to the examples from Tunis, like this is not the only example. I think part of the issue is that markets are seen in such a negative way. Like they're seen as nuisances and as something that is kind of just, you know, they can just simply be reordered or something. So there's no attempt to kind of understand how these markets function, right? Because I guess how does a market function? Well, you need to understand what are the type of circulations that are happening, what are the, as Kieran said, what are the multiple functions of markets that are, you know, social, that are political, they're cultural, they function on so many levels. So I think part of the problem is it takes a lot of work to create that type of knowledge about a market. And this is something that I was really impressed with also in Bill's movie, because I feel like, right, there's that work is actually being done. Whereas in Tunis, like if you ask anybody about El-Kherba, like no one knows anything about this place. The history hasn't written. The actors aren't recognized. So I think, you know, that was what's really also interesting about Warwick Junction, that it was a very, very long process that preceded regeneration of understanding who's using this, who's working there.
Thank you, Katharina. And Mark, just to bring attention to you in the chat, Alina has referenced Pike Place Market as one possible example that speaks to your question. Eugenio, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Do you want to take the screen and share your question?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to all the speakers. It was really interesting. I live in Haggerston, so not far from Dalston, so I go to Ridley Road quite often. It is a lovely place, and it's a shame to see what's happening. I had a question for Katharina, I guess, that relates also to the gentrification that's happening, that sort of is an influencing factor affecting Ridley Road. Is there a similar situation of speculative development or gentrification that has impacted on El-Kherba? Obviously, Tunis is a very different context to London in terms of how the city works, and I'd be interested to know, you know, what the main factors have been, whether that has been an element of it as well.
Should I just directly respond?
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, because I think that's obviously, like, I think that's kind of an important difference. So I think it's important to say that Tunis at this moment does not face, of course, anything comparable to the type of like real estate pressures and kind of speculative pressures that a place like London faces. Definitely not. And actually, Tunis has been a little bit of an exception as well in the region, because in other places like Cairo, like Beirut, there's been a lot more kind of speculative pressure on real estate than in Tunis. And Tunis, until the revolution, had actually very restrictive laws for investment. So it made it almost impossible until now for foreigners to invest. So for example, you cannot have offshore companies investing in real estate in Tunisia so far. But, and the but is kind of a big but, and that's why I'm saying these debates on London are, I think, absolutely crucial for a place like Tunis. Tunisia is in the process of liberalizing all these investment laws and kind of provisions on speculation. And what is happening at the moment, that there's almost nothing is listed, and there's very little heritage preservation, meaning big parts of the kind of, especially colonial era, like city center is disappearing and is being demolished. So I think this is changing really rapidly, and there's kind of new pressures on space and on real estate coming up. But there's no, I think also the word gentrification is kind of problematic in the Tunisian context, because that's not really happening at this moment, especially not in the city center. It's important to say that in Tunis, the city center is a very like ill-reputed space. So that's a bit why also we're focusing on this historical old city, because it's still a space that is perceived as kind of a dangerous and undervalued space, right? So yeah, so there's not kind of the same real estate pressures. And I think really to understand why did the government appear in the space, and why was there this kind of speculative performance of violence in the space, I think it's much more about the post-revolutionary context, in which there was kind of markets and street markets became this emblem for government failure. It was kind of this idea, oh, the markets are spreading. This means, you know, the authoritarian regime has left. And this is what democracy looks like. You know, democracy is chaos. It's chaos in the street. So it's kind of a performance, almost performative act of kind of return of state power, showing state power through the police, relying kind of on this kind of brute force.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Katharina. I'm aware we're past 8 o'clock, but such is the beauty of the conversation that we still have quite a lot of people left, and I'm definitely not planning on leaving anytime soon. But I'm aware that Bill and Katharina might have better places to be and better things to do. So we'll start thinking about wrapping up. But there's a couple other questions that we can just work our way through. So the first one is from Yun Ling, who's put it in the chat. For me to ask. So it's for you, Bill. And the comment is, there's one trader in the film of Ridley Road Market saying that the market is welcoming change, just not the type of change that would replace the old things. So I just want to ask Bill about how he thinks and expects the good change could happen to the Ridley Road Market.
Well, I mean, I can say that traders are not happy with the way the market is at the moment. Many of them are not happy. And it's essential stuff. A lack of public lavatories, poor drainage so that their stalls are flooded from the drains after heavy rainfall. This sort of thing. So, and obviously they're not happy with these regulations that are being introduced because they feel under tremendous pressure. They're not happy with the thought of having to be moved because I think what the authorities don't understand is that, first of all, the traders are all competing with each other. If there are a dozen fruit and veg stalls in Ridley Road Market, they're competing for business. And it takes years to build up a customer base. And if you suddenly say to that trader, oh, we're going to redevelop the shopping village, you've got to move, you can move down the bottom there, they're going to lose all their business because their customer isn't going to be able to find them. So there are a lot of things people are dissatisfied with. And one of the things in particular, I'll give you an example. Last year, Hackney was offered £1 million and they've employed consultants, as they always do, to come in and see how the market could be redesigned, change the layouts and that sort of thing. Now, I can show you a document from 2005 when exactly the same thing happened. Hackney spent the public money on consultants who came up with exactly the same ideas about redesigning the market and nothing happened. So I think there's a feeling that amongst traders that their money and my money and Hackney's people's money is being spent on things that are actually not benefiting the ordinary people who the money is originally intended for. So I think there is dissatisfaction by traders in the market. They think there are definitely room for improvement. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Ewan's on the commute, so, but yeah, I think that definitely answered it. I don't think there are any more questions left, but we've got one observation from Siofan, which I'll just read out. She's being shy and doesn't want to take the microphone. So I'll just read it out. So I come from a tiny village in the middle of the English countryside where the closest town to me had a farmer's market every weekend. It was never under threat because it was something that was celebrated as it formed a part of our town's identity. What's apparent to me from the treatment of Ridley Road and El-Kherba is that those in power do not identify with the vendors, which speaks volumes as to the demographic of people who are in power. So building from that observation, the question she asks, and I'd like to leave this as the final question for both Bill and Katharina to respond to. Do you think it's a case of infiltrating at the top rather than organizing from the ground up? I'm guessing to save these markets and ensure that they continue to thrive and serve the people that they do serve now. So just to clarify, do you think it's a case of infiltrating at the top rather than organizing from the ground up?
So, is Katharina going to go first on that one? Shall I respond first then?
No, I can. It's as you want.
Katharina, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, so okay, maybe I think from my point of view, it's kind of not an either or, right? I mean, it's not either you need kind of a bottom-up organization or you need to try and influence kind of government attitudes like at the top. I think I can only speak for the context of El-Kherba, but maybe markets in Tunisia more broadly. And I'd kind of like to relate it to the situation that we're in at the moment, also with the pandemic, right? I mean, Tunisia is currently going through kind of a second wave of the pandemic and a kind of second decision this year to close weekly markets all over the country, which is causing like a massive socioeconomic crisis and has really had like an extremely detrimental impact on like thousands of livelihoods here. And it's a discussion that is not being discussed. So a lot of the kind of measures taken were contested, etc. But the kind of question around like markets and the closure of markets is really not being discussed. And I think it shows how both at the level of government, but also still at a kind of level of kind of public awareness, markets don't figure as central urban spaces. They don't figure as spaces that actually, are crucial to the city. And And this is absurd in a city like Tunis, where you have like extreme density of markets, and where in comparison to a city like London, markets are still very clearly the spaces where the vast majority of urban dwellers shops, not just for fresh food, but also for clothes, for kitchenware, etc. So actually you see kind of an absurd situation of a kind of ubiquity of market and the centrality of markets to people's lives. But like the comment you just read out, obviously like of a working class and kind of lower middle class, but then kind of like an elite in government that seems completely kind of oblivious to the centrality of these markets. So I think that definitely, right, there has to be kind of a level of organizing, also kind of from the bottom up, that tries to raise awareness about, like, you know, who are the people affected, who are the people working in these markets. And coming back to what Bill was saying, I think kind of treating market traders as interlocutors, which is not being done, right? Because we're just in the process of actually trying a market that burned down next to El-Kherba, to think with the traders of, like, you know, how can kind of a redesign of the market, or like a reconstruction of the market look like. And it's actually difficult because there's a lot of mistrust, because the traders have years and years of experiences of not being treated as interlocutors, but as just kind of being treated as an extremely stigmatized population that is never kind of encountered on an equal footing. So you have to work through layers of mistrust. And I really think in Tunis, kind of the starting point has to be, and I think Ridley Road is obviously years or decades ahead of us, is kind of really creating knowledge about these spaces and about their kind of centrality and their multiple functions in the city, before you can even start kind of hoping to influence government decision making.
Thank you for that. And Bill, over to you.
Yeah, well, the question was, should you try and climb the greasy pole to infiltrate the corporation, or should you resist? I mean, the problem about street resistance is that you don't always win. And the point is, if you fight, you can lose. But if you don't fight, you've already lost. So you've only got one option, really. Now, if you want to infiltrate, if you want to climb the slippery pole, you've got to obey the rules. And the theory is, if you obey the rules, when you get to the top, you can change things. It actually doesn't work like that, in my view, because in my view, the corporate entity has its own agenda, independent of the people who operate in it. The corporate entity of a local authority is interested in getting income from development, from collecting fees from traders, because those are the fees that keep them in work, that keep bureaucracy in work. If you imagine the bureaucracy as a sort of parasitic entity lying on the city, they have to derive income from market fees, from development, from the money that local authorities get from development to keep them all in a job. And so the corporate entity has its own agenda, a bit like a company has its own agenda, independent of the individuals within it, in my view. And so I wouldn't recommend a slippery pole. I mean, I think the answer for me anyway has been to try and find out as much as you can and spread that knowledge as much as you can to raise as much awareness and counteract the myth and the what they call these days the false truths that are being marketed by the media.
Super. Well, I think that is a important end to the conversation, a point to end on. What I'm gonna ask is, if everyone who has their videos turned off could just quickly turn it on, just so you can see everyone's faces and get a nice scope of the beautiful cohort that we've had join us today. We've had some beautiful minds and beautiful tongues. So if you guys don't mind just sharing your things, so you can get the snap as well. Beautiful. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you everyone for joining, first of all. Yeah, we've been looking forward to this for a long time. It's actually the first event that we've done since last November, and it's the first digital event we've done, well, forever actually. It's the first one we've ever done. So the first on many counts. Thank you so much for sharing this space with us. Thank you so much for giving your time, energy, and intellect to this. To Bill and Katharina, thank you. yeah, so much to build upon, so much to think about. I'm really excited to mark this as the, just another step in the dialogue that we can all share with each other and move forward with. So thank you. Yeah, do follow us on all our socials and all that razzmatazz. We've got a lot of stuff coming out soon, which we're really excited to share with you all. So yeah, thank you again, and enjoy your dinners and drinks and teas and sleeps and whatnot. Thank you.